Well, welcome back. This is part two. We're going to talk a little bit more about air pollution and the atmosphere. I want to talk about acid rain. You did your experiment with acid rain last week or this week, depending on how it's going for you, where you watered your lettuce seed with, well, basically you soaked your lettuce seed in various types of water and looked at what would happen if they would grow or not. Now, I'm going to guess that none of you, and so far none of you, have had your seeds grow in a pH of 3, which is vinegar. But what do you think about the rain? And if you have pieces left over, you might want to try it. I actually collected rainwater the first time it rained for a couple days here this spring, and I tested the pH and I grew my seeds on the actual rain. We did find that the rain coming down here was like 5.7, 5.8 pH where I live, which is good. It means the rain is clean. Acid rain can have a pH of 4.3 or lower. We have seen evidence in 20 years ago where it was raining in parts of Canada and Siberia where the pH was 3 or below, which is just acid enough that you could feel it on your skin. It's caused by carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxides, and nitrous oxides mixing together with water and converting into an acid. Carbonic acid is one of the biggest players in this. Carbon dioxide, when it mixes with H2O, becomes carbonic acid, which is actually the same thing you use in your blood to determine that you should take a breath and exhale. When carbon dioxide rises in your blood, it actually converts into carbonic acid. You have a part of your brain that monitors for changes in pH, very slight changes in pH. Your blood goes from 7.4 to 7.3, and it forces you to take an inhale and an exhale. The exhale is what it's looking for. It means you're building up too much carbon dioxide. The atmosphere has no mechanism like that to get rid of the excess carbon dioxide. It has to wait for that carbon dioxide to be built back into living things and kept either under the ocean or in life. When I look at maps of acid rain and I compare 1986 to 2016, you can see that acid rain really, I'm measuring the rain here, was really a huge effect across the industrialized parts of the United States where people lived. And we see the same pattern across Europe, across Asia, where people are living and polluting and getting a lot more acid rain. It kills fish, it kills plants, it kills insects. If we take the streams and we lower their pH below 5, most of our native fish can't survive in that kind of conditions. As the acid rain falls on our cities and our forests, this is Siberia, it actually kills all the plants and we end up with these stands of dead trees, and most things can't survive being covered in acid. Cement, this is the breakdown of, I think my head's over part of this, but the breakdown of things like statues, things that are outside all the time, our structures. This is actually the acid eating away at that structure and degrading it. But look at these maps again, because acid rain is one of our great success stories. And down here, this is a history of what happened to acid rain. Montreal Protocol worked with ozone, and it turns out that destroying forests across the entirety of the planet also was something people were pretty upset about. And we've been able to work and deal with acid rain by stopping pollution at the source. Between 1986 and 2016, what happened is updated Clean Air Acts and updated regulations and controls about emissions from cars and emissions from power plants and coal burning plants and manufacturing were put in place all over the world in response to the people getting sick and the fact that the animals and the plants were dying. And that has been fairly effective. When we measure, if you have excess pieces in your kit, or if you even just go out with your pH measurement equipment and look at the acidity of the rain that's coming down, and I think when you're watching this, it may be raining right now. Take a look at that pH and you'll find it's much closer to 5.6 than it was in 1986, when it would have been something like 5.1. If we want to reduce acid deposition, and we'll talk later about what happens when we see a rise in the acid in the ocean. We don't have the solution for that one yet. But the rise in acid in the atmosphere is really about lowering our usage of coals and things that burn particulates into the atmosphere that convert into acid. We can add lime and neutralizers like we did in the Cerrado in Brazil to change the soil and return it back, but that's a human labor heavy job. We can remove sulfur dioxides and nitrous oxides. Wow, this really just turned itself into its own word. Nitrous oxides from exhaust and smokestacks. We can put filters on them. And I want to show you in a little bit. We have actually a pretty interesting way of filtering those particles out. And we can tax people who emit those kinds of particles and make it expensive to do so. Because if it's too expensive to pollute, the solution would be to not pollute. It's a win-win, except for the people who were polluting. Air pollution indoors is also an issue. It might be an issue for you. Your book talks about radon. We don't have a lot of incidents of radon in where we live in New Jersey, so I'm kind of skipping over it, but I encourage you to go look at it. Radon is a gas that can accumulate in your house depending on the geology underneath you. That radon is radioactive. You should, when you buy a house or you move into a home, it should actually everywhere in the US be monitored for radon gas. And then you have to have a scrubber on if you have it in your, because it's coming from the ground underneath you. It's more likely things like byproducts of buying manufactured products, like off-gassing of sheets or plastics that you have in your house, tobacco smoke, road smoke. I have a bird. I'm sure you've seen her. She's sound asleep right now. But I have air filters running all the time around here because we live on a highway. And those particles were getting in the house, and I was worried about her tiny little air sacs. Those filters build up with black particles all the time because it's dust and small particles that are really very dangerous for us, but monumentally more dangerous to her. In less developed countries, it's more likely to be fuel burning of like wood or charcoal, dung. We talked about peat, which smells kind of nice, but it also burns particles. Coal. The more affluent your society is, the less likely you have to worry about indoor pollution. The less affluent your society is, the more likely you're exposed to higher levels of pollution that you're breathing into your lungs and your cardiovascular system. It causes major health effects. Asthma is probably directly tied to a lot of air pollution, chronic bronchitis, where your bronchial tubes in your lungs are constantly inflamed. Emphysema is a long-term damage that results in your inability to take deep breaths and exhale very well. Lung cancers, heart attacks, and strokes are all tied to pollution levels in breathing those in. I took this away from the National Institute of Health. This is a human hair. This is beach sand. So if you looked at the sand in your soil sample, you have an idea of what sand is like. This is dust and pollen. And this little red strip right here is the particles we really, really have to worry about. These are things, organic compounds, or things from combustion, burning fuels that are tiny particulates at 2.5 microns. These things are, they can get into your circulatory system. That size particulates, smaller than 2.5 microns, are the most dangerous to us because they can get into your systems. It's not just going to make you want to cough. You might not even notice you're inhaling them, but they cause inflammation throughout your entire body, block your circulatory system, get into your tissues, and cause abnormal mitosis. They can also interfere in fetal development if you're pregnant. I want to point out bronchitis and emphysema again. These are your bronchial, here is highlighted here. When these become irritated and inflamed, you cough all the time. It hurts. If you've had bronchitis, you know that it's painful to cough. This can be a chronic condition. That means it does not go away. Emphysema is where it's completely or partially blocked. Your lungs are these incredibly delicate networks of pathways, that tubes that branch and branch and branch and branch until they end up in these tiny little air sacs. These air sacs are surrounded by your circulatory system, your capillaries, and things can pass in and out of these little air sacs, in and out of your circulatory system. And that's how you get oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, but you can also get these incredibly tiny particles in and out. If I want to stop them, my best strategy is to stop them at the source. Well, okay, my best strategy is not to create them in the first place, but then I want to stop them at the source. I want to highlight this. I feel like my head may be over this side. This is the negative side, and this is the positive side of this structure. Dust and pollutants are charged very often, so we can move them out of smokestacks really, really simply by having this electrical little system. It's an electrical filter. This sits at the top of a smokestack. As the particles and the everything that's being pollution flows up the smokestack, it passes through this electrically charged filter from positive to negative side. The particles of pollution get stuck to these because they're charged, these plates. And then every once in a while, somebody presses a button down at the bottom and it runs a boop, 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 boop cleaner, or it turns off the electricity and all the dust falls into a well, and then it goes down into a tube and you just you scoop it out like you would clean out the flue in your chimney. This is incredibly effective. It's been massively shown to reduce the amount of pollution, and across the US, these are required on our smokestacks. We can either reduce our production of it, and we can remove those particles at the source. We've actually been pretty good at doing both of them. I know everything seems really dark all the time. This is 1970. This is 2019. There's the most recent data I could find for you all. The Clean Air Act was enacted in 1963 with the idea that it was important that our air was clean. Didn't have a lot of teeth, nor did it specify anything particularly that it was supposed to control. In 1970 and again in 1977, the Clean Air Act was updated to identify critical pollutants, things that were actually dangerous to us or the environment, and established levels of all of those that were acceptable. By the 1990s, another amendment to the Clean Air Act basically held transportation pollutants and industry pollutants, it held them to task. It made them responsible for maintaining and decreasing that amount of pollution. This has resulted in putting those filters on the top of all of the smokestacks, but it also has resulted in cars with carburetors, which are our defense against spewing black ash out of the back of our cars. It means that our cities are much, much cleaner. When I was a little child, and we would go to New York City, when I always hated it. I hated it because we'd come home, and for like 2 days after you got back from New York, when you blew your nose, black stuff would come out. Just black. I've been to Brooklyn every couple of months in the last, 2 or 3 years. Not once has that, in fact, I've forgotten about it. The amazing cleanup that has happened in the last 30 years, so that was like the 90s to today, that amazing cleanup has happened because of the Clean Air Act actually having teeth. And the people who live in the United States, because these are U.S. laws, are actually expecting accountability from car companies, but also manufacturing companies. We don't want our air to be poisoned. The biggest argument that people will make against enacting pollution laws is the fact that it costs a lot of money. Building that infrastructure costs a lot of money. Stopping pollution is expensive. It's cheaper just to pollute everything and make it blow away and hopefully pollute someone else. The direct cost of implementing Clean Air Act regulations is close to $65 billion. They're not wrong. That's a lot of money. But the payoff has been over $2 trillion. There's actually been more money made from clean cars and clean manufacturing than there was from polluting cars and polluting manufacturing. There's an initial upfront cost that is exorbitant. but the payoff within a couple years is astronomical. That plays out across industries. The initial cost is a huge hurdle, but after that, the payoff is economically and socially and health-wise, it's a win-win-win. I know I've said that like 8 times today. It's a benefit on all levels. Data constantly support the fact that advances in technology do not require increased pollution. In fact, as we make advancements in technology, we can make them and pollute less. And that means better technology, more accessible, and better health outcomes for absolutely everyone involved. As those stories have played out and the enforcement of the Clean Air Act has played out, every single one of those particles that we want to avoid in our atmosphere has gone down since 1990. This is, again, there's a delay in getting some of these data, so it's usually about 10 years. Right now, our emissions across almost all the United States is below the expected and required amounts that the Clean Air Act in 1990 instated, which is great. Because we don't want that. We want this. This is a picture of exactly the same location in 2025 as it was in 1952. On a clear day, you should be able to see forever. The air pollution is everywhere. There's always going to be particles in the air. The goal of the Clean Air Act is to restore the air quality to pre-industrial levels. The Clean Air Act has partners, matching acts across most of the world. In London, after the 1952 disaster that killed so many people, there was a big outcry about having so many pollutants in such a high industry, in a high residential area. The Clean Air Act was followed up in London by a series of Clean Air Acts across Europe that have led to a much, much cleaner environment for absolutely everyone. These monuments in the 1980s were actually black from the pollution on them. By the 1990s and the early 2000s, not only was the pollutant level very low in London, but people were scrubbing there was a movement to scrub all of these monuments clean. And now when you go and look at it, there's very little evidence of the London smogs, and you actually don't see them anymore because they're just pollutants. LA, very similar. LA enacting the EPA Clean Air Act and estimates from the EPA estimating what has happened since the Clean Air Act. Although LA can still, still pollutants will sit there, and some of that is natural pollutants from the surrounding environment. The quality of life and the quality of our air has improved markedly in the last 30 years. We just have to hold on and keep improving it because we actually are reaching our goals on these things. It's important that we can all breathe clean air. Because that's really fundamentally access to air and water and food is some of our fundamental human rights. And they should be clean and nutritious and available. With that, I guess that's the end. So I usually have like a little wrap up, but I guess I don't. I'm going to go here. I'm going to leave this in because I don't want to edit it. This week, just a little quiz. The discussion is, and I don't know, I think you kind of watch these toward the end, probably right before the quiz. The discussion it's serious. I really want to see what you're going to do for the rest of the semester. Everyone loses hope at this point. I think you can do it, but it's really hard to hold on to any concept for 16 weeks. 12 weeks seems to be about most people's maximum. So sit down, really make a plan for success for the rest of the semester. This is how environmental science works, right? We got to talk about things that make us uncomfortable. You got to be willing to listen to people that you maybe don't immediately agree with, and you have to plan for the long-term future. Practice that with yourself this week. Plan for your long-term future. I know some of you are graduating, some of you are not. Let's make sure that the next couple years are on target for you because you got a lot of work to do, right? And you should be able to get it done. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Send me an email if you have any questions, and I'll see you soon. All right, bye-bye.